Right. The goal of this demo is to show the whole sets of tools that are available in Modelio to define requirements, to document them and analyze their impact on developments and tests. The example used in this demo is an e-commerce website that sells products. Modelio offers several ways to visualize, define and structure the requirements. The first view is used to visualize and define the structure of requirements. For example, requirements can be sorted by types. In this configuration, we have functional and non-functional requirements. In the functional requirements, we can store those related to orders, cart, or product search. There is another view that lets us visualize all the requirements of a kind in a spreadsheet. By double-clicking on the shopping cart folder, a table is displayed showing all its requirements. Off-the-shelf properties are proposed. The requirements definition, of course, but also its origin, which can be customer, marketing, law, its costs, benefits, risk, which can be low, medium, high, stability, and so on. We'll see in a while that new properties can be added easily. This editor also includes a form view that allows us to focus on one requirement to define it. A specific tooltip is available for each property to make the requirement definition an easy task. A third view lets us graphically visualize the requirements and create links between them. The standard SysML links are available. For example, we have derive, which is used to bind different levels of requirement, satisfy, to indicate that the model element, like a class for example, has to satisfy the requirements, verify, which is used to specify that a test case must verify a requirement, refine, which can be used to add details. Of course, all of these views are synchronized and they let you create and modify requirements in any of them. For example, in the diagram view, we are going to add a save cart requirements in the shopping cart folder. As you can see, the requirements appears in all the other views. Here in the spreadsheet. So in the diagram, I can decide to display more or less details. For example, I will display the properties of the new requirements and enter its definition. Now, okay. Now, to split the composite requirements into several units requirements, I can create a requirement inside the Save to Cart requirement. The composition will be displayed as a link representing the containing relationship. It is also possible to use Excel to create and define requirements. From the shopping cart folder, the Excel Exchange export command will create an Excel file containing the whole set of requirements of the folder. In Excel, I can create new requirements, I can delete some requirements, and I can modify the properties. To update the Modelio project, all I have to do is save the Excel document, then go back to Modelio and run the import command, select the file to import, and I get a report showing the modifications that have been made to the Modelio project. Modelio also proposes a requirements archive feature. With this feature activated, all the archived requirements are visible. Now, all the different tools we've seen also make it possible to create and define business rules, goals, and dictionary. Okay, we are now going to modify the standard Modelio properties and add new ones. We'll work with the already defined functionality property sets. I just need to copy and paste the property sets in my model. Then I rename it into a new name like specific functionality to distinguish it from the one provided by Modelio. Now let's add new properties. We'll add the requirements creation date. Then we'll add a tick box to indicate that the requirements is comprehensible. For each property, its type can be defined. We can have a date, an enumeration, in order to get a drop-down list with a fixed choice, an integer or a boolean to obtain a tick box. We'll also add a multi-line field, which we call reformulation, so the requirements can be reformulated if need be. Now, to be able to add these new properties to our requirements, all we have to do is bind this new set to the requirements container. For example, I select the shopping cart container, and in its properties I can define its type. You can see that specific properties appear in the list. I've double-clicked on the container to display spreadsheet editor, and we can see the requirements with the new properties, like creation date, tick box, and the reformulation field. Modelio also provides tools to create other kinds of elements directly from the requirements. For example, from the Save to Cart requirements, we are going to create a use case. From the requirements, we run the element creation wizard. I specify the element in which I want to create the use case. From there, Modelio will suggest a list of elements that can be created from a requirement. Activity to create a process, or use case to create a use case. I precise that the use case description is pre-filled with the requirements definition by checking the copy text as description tick box, and then I can name the use case. Let's see the results. The use case has been created, and a set of notes is suggested to enter the complete description of the use case, its constraints, exceptions, pre- and post conditions, as well as its description. We are now going to create a use case diagram and unmask our use case in it in order to bind it to the actors. By simply drag and dropping the use case into the diagram, I can display it with its description. A traceability link is automatically created between the use case and the requirements from which it was created. Since the client actor already exists, all I have to do is search the model for it and then unmask it in the diagram to bind it to the use case. With the same wizard, I could also have created the actor from the directory dictionary term, for example, or even a UML class. Modelio also comes with a powerful tool dedicated to visualizing and any kind of link, like traceability links, and it is called the link editor. You can see that the links created appear in this link editor. The use case in the middle and the actor on the left are linked by a communication link. The requirements on the right is linked to the use case by a traceability link. Now let's change the perspective and reorganize the different views of Modelio so we can put the link editor in the center of the Modelio interface. And let's start from the account management requirements. By selecting it, I make it the central element of the link editor, and the editor shows the link that go to and from it. This editor is very useful to carry out an impact analysis. In our example, we can see that modifying these requirements will have an impact on two use cases. If I display additional levels, we can see that there will also be an impact on a component that manages the accounts, and of course on the code, the account class, or the client class. It is also possible to browse the elements by following the links. The toolbar lets me filter what kind of links I want to display in the editor. In a standard UML modeling process, the link editor will display inheritance associations, use, traceability, or dependency. Now let's have a look at the class account. The editor shows a composition link towards the class shopping cart and a use link toward the class client. The dependencies between elements are also rendered here. For example, no link has been defined between the packages online store and products. However, Modelio states that there are reasons why a dependency exists between those two packages. Links exist between classes of those packages, like use, import, association, or use of a class as the type of a method parameter. The link editor also makes it possible to easily create links between elements. When an element is dragged and into the editor, Modelio proposes to create an association, an import link, or a generalization link. The kind of link depends on the type of the source and target element. In addition, Modelio can generate matrices to display and modify links. We'll change perspective again and create a matrix. Okay. In this matrix, you can see the traceability links that exist between the requirements and the use cases. If I define a link in the matrix, the link editor will display it automatically. And of course, the content of the matrix can be customized. Now we'll see another very useful feature, which is one of the main features of Modelio, the document generation. Okay. In our example, we need to generate several kinds of documents. Traceability matrices to analyze the impact, completeness and coverage of the requirements, specifications documents, and conception documents. Once we have defined the documents to generate, we can physically produce the document at any stage of the repository evolution, both manually and automatically. You can see here that there are several documents to produce in both Word and HTML format, business rules, dictionary requirements, and traceability matrix. To physically produce the document, I just have to run the generation command. And it just takes a few seconds to get a nice document. Here we are. There's the result. We have chosen to produce a traceability matrix for all the requirements. During the generation, Modelio has followed the traceability links to extract all the elements impacted by each requirement. For example, the requirements account management has a traceability link towards the use case managed client account. On the other hand, the requirement client number has no impact yet, so we can assume that this requirement has not been implemented yet. And it's very easy to create a document in order to extract information from it. We're going to create a new document to extract the functional requirements in a Word document. Modelio will help us defining the document. We need to enter the document's name and a target format, Word, OpenOffice, or HTML. Then the style sheet in order to use the word model and graphic chart of the company. Then a template that defines the way the information will be extracted and how it will be presented in the document. For example, a table, bullet list, chapters, etc. We can enter all the information for the front page, like document title, author, date. And the list can also, of course, be extended. We can add different tables, the ones that we want to show in our document. And then the last step is to choose the elements we want to produce in the document. So we just drag and drop the functional requirements, and we are done with the document's definition. We can now produce it physically. To produce the revision table, Modelio asks us to add a comment. And here we are. So, like the Excel import, Modelio has a feature that lets us retrieve the content of a document. All the elements extracted from the Modelio repository can be modified in the document, their name and description, for instance. For example, we're going to rename the requirements order form into access order form and modify its description. And then, to retrieve the modifications we have made in the document and update the Modelio project, we just need to save the documents and run the update command in Modelio. A report shows which elements have been modified. You can see here that the new name and the new description are present. Here in the spreadsheet, and of course in the diagram we can see the model has been updated as well. Now, whether in HTML or Word, you can produce more complete documents. We're going to generate a document containing requirements, a traceability matrix, use cases, business processes, and a business model. And all of this in HTML format. This is the kind of documents that could be published on a company's portal, for example. So, here we are. Right. In the document, we can see a table which is a summary of the actors, use cases, and below a diagram showing the actors and use cases as well. The diagram itself can be browsed through. If you want to see the details of the use case checkout, for example, you just have to click on the elements in the image to access its complete description. The use case details show us the actors who are part of the use case, the description, pre and post conditions, constraints, and all the scenarios in text and as sequence diagrams. So that's it for doc generation. Now the last step of this demo will be to show you how to share the requirements and models between different users. Until now, all our model modifications were done locally. This prevented us from impacting the other users. But now, our project is connected to a Constellation server that hosts all our models in a Subversion server. To share our modifications with the other users, we have to commit them. During the commit operation, a report shows what modifications will be published in the repository. New elements, modified elements, removed elements, and for each commit, a comment can be added. That's the committing process in progress. And done. Now let's say a new user is joining the team and has to work on the requirements definition. We need to configure a project for this new user. The project can be configured from a web application called Constellation. When logged as the administrator, we are going to modify the shopping cart project. In this interface, we can see how the project is configured for each user. For example, the project we're working on is configured for one user, Tony, who is an architect and has the possibility to work on two different repositories, design and requirements. Let's add a new user, which is called Emma. Emma works in the analyst team. Unlike Tony, the analyst team has no access to the design work model, but they can access the requirements one. That's the analyst team and the work model they can work on. Now, Emma needs to be able to use other repositories which are not specific to this project. Instead of duplicating those general requirements, we will reuse them in our project. Those requirements repositories are published as libraries on the company's HTTP server on a regular basis. So all we have to do is to check the libraries we want, here regulation and security, and affect them to the analyst team. Right. Now that the project has been adapted for Emma, she's able to connect to it via Modelio. So we need to start Modelio again. But this time, we will be logged as Emma. There we go. So we need to enter the Constellation server address and Emma's login and password. This first connection requires downloading the repositories. So while Modelio is connecting, we will see the different steps that it goes through, like extracting files, and later on starting modules. There we go. So we can see the Modelio project is now configured. Emma has access to the shared repositories, containing the requirements definition, and 2 read-only libraries that will let her reuse the requirements which are used in other projects. In the project requirements, we can see that we have retrieved the requirements previously modified by Tony. Now, the fact that we have several repositories in the same project is not a problem to define the traceability links, because Modelio manages inter-repository links just as if they were in a single repository. For example, we are going to add a traceability link between the requirement security and the requirements HTTPS, which is defined in the security requirements repository. And here we go.